Today, we're kicking off a new series simply titled, What Is? It's going to be organized under its own playlist on YouTube, so you'll be able to find them pretty quickly. And essentially, it's just us going through history, identifying really key moments in time, maybe their events, could be books, policies, legislation, anything that had a demonstrable impact on society or really helps explain how we got to this point. So the very first thing we're going to look at is the Kerner Report. So let's get after it. UNFTR. The National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders is known to us as the Kerner Report, perhaps one of the most honest and revealing portraits of America. Commissioned in 1967 by President Lyndon Johnson, the commission was organized to understand the racial uprisings in the 1960s within American cities, most notably the Watts riots in Los Angeles. A month after the commission issued its report, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, and a nation heaved towards even more violence and unrest. King himself had once characterized riots as the language of the unheard, and if that's the case, the Kerner Commission was created to listen. The Kerner Report is remarkable not only for its frank and authentic portrayal of issues that plagued Black Americans in particular, but for how the remedies that were prescribed are both haunting and fresh a half-century later. The report is colloquially named for the chair of the commission, Otto Kerner, then the governor of Illinois. The commission was tasked with understanding why Americans had taken to the streets in recent years and what could be done to prevent this moving forward. The commission delivered what was one of the most comprehensive and enlightening treatises on the cultural, legal, economic, and structural barriers that prevented Black Americans from gaining equitable access to the system. Its stated conclusion at the beginning of the report was, quote, "Our nation is moving toward two societies, one Black, one white, separate and unequal." One of the sources we're going to pull from is the podcast Newsbeat, which did a deep dive into the report and interviewed a number of leading community figures who are working to revive the findings and recommendations of this report, if nothing else than to point out how little progress has been made. As Newsbeat writes, quote, 12 deeply held grievances listed and ranked in 3 levels of intensity included from highest to lowest, police practices, unemployment and underemployment, inadequate housing, inadequate education, poor recreation facilities and programs, ineffectiveness of the political structure and grievance mechanisms, disrespectful white attitudes, discriminatory administration of justice, inadequacy of federal programs, inadequacy of municipal services, discriminatory consumer and credit policies, and inadequate welfare programs, end quote. There's a summary that precedes the main report that highlights the findings, so the report is truly an accessible work. The full report is really a revelation, however. For anyone interested in the history of race relations and oppression in this country, it's essential reading. Section 1 goes into investigative reporting style detail about seminal incidents in American cities between 1963 and 1967, when the report was commissioned. Birmingham, Savannah, Cambridge, Maryland, Chicago, Philadelphia, Jacksonville, Cleveland, Harlem, Bed-Stuy, Jersey City, Patterson, Selma, Bogalusa, Los Angeles. Some of these events live in our consciousness like the Watts riots and the siege in Newark or the fires in Detroit. Others kind of blend and blur into a haze of violence and unrest largely dismissed as the 60s, man. The report, though, paints vivid images of local police, National Guardsmen, rioters, demonstrators, buildings ablaze, and sniper fire. Periods of calm and brief respites in one city before a brush fire ignites in another. The level of detail in this report is striking. It's fair, searing, and painful. LBJ wanted to know what would make a community rise up and destroy itself. Who were these people? What did they want? Who participated? And as importantly, who didn't? Who's to blame? What is to blame? The report takes aim at this by establishing what it calls, quote, patterns of disorder gleaned from 10 disparate events in 1967 alone. Among the findings, the report points out that, quote, no civil disorder was typical in all respects. While civil disorders of 1967 were racial in character, they were not interracial. Most of those who attacked white authority and property seemed to be demanding fuller participation. It found that these riots developed. They weren't triggered. There wasn't a single event, rather a confluence of tensions and conditions that just blew. It said many of the participants were young adults, proud of their race and somewhat better educated than their neighbors. There were counter-protests, negotiations among the disaffected. In other words, civil social behavior even in the most fractured of circumstances. The Kerner Report moves from the events themselves to speak to the conditions that inspired them, the places, the people. It humanizes the experiences of those in the urban ghettos and explains how the ghettos even came into being. In offering prescriptive advice, it touches on the role of both the police and the community, how the media can expand coverage of the issues that precede these events and not just the death and destruction of disorder. And it offers comprehensive recommendations for national action at the conclusion of the report that addresses poverty, housing, employment, and education. The best part about the Kerner Commission Report is the relevance and resonance to this day. The worst part about it is the same thing. If you're interested in the history of race in the United States, the upheavals of the 1960s, and what it looks like when good people come together to analyze a problem without lobbyists and special interest groups getting hold of the material and scrubbing it, the Kerner Report is for you.